And Rogério, when you speak, you might want to explain to everybody how to obtain access to the interpretation, okay? I think it's better if you do that because you know how to do that. I must admit I am not really aware of how it works. I'm not that used to this system, so if you can speak about that, would be best. I might forget something. Can we do it that way? Yeah, for sure. Because Tawana, I think, is not coming in, right? All right, so after you speak, you just let me do it real quick. All right.
Vocês conseguem ver quantas pessoas tem na sala do Zoom, pessoal?
Can you see how many people are in the public room here as attendees?
Eu entrei aqui na sala pública com o meu outro e-mail, né?
I just joined the attendees room with another account, and I think it's everything is working. But I think we only have one other person here. Yeah, mine is showing that the meeting is not valid. You should try again. I don't know if people are able to join. If those using that link that ends in QT09, is that it? Something's off.
Quem que botou o link em português? O link da...
Okay, so the link is on the chat box here. This is the link for the meeting. Yeah, I think people have the wrong link then. Jesus. Let me check. Do you have a WhatsApp group or something like that? We're on Teams. Well, we'll have to send that all over again. Now, let me check. Yeah, we have 2 participants here now. So this link has been shared with William, with Bill, so that he could share with you guys.
Yes, Rosario, do you have the link now? The correct one?
I don't know.
É isso que tá no chat. Eu botei no chat aqui.
It's the one on the chat box. The yeah, I think they used some other link that they got before. So Clay is in. Then we have another one here. Well, they had a different link then. Okay, so there was a mistake then. So the link for this webinar is not the same as the other ones, right? No, it's a new link. It's a different one. Each webinar will have a different link. Okay, I'll send that to the group again and hope folks are able to join.
Já mandei aqui nos que eu conheço.
Okay, I sent to people I know.
Vai começar a aparecer agora.
Okay, I think people are going to show up now. I sent that through this WhatsApp group outside of the other one.
Bom, agora já começou a aumentar.
Well, I think we have some people joining right now.
Oi, Rogério, o que foi que aconteceu?
Tawana, o link
Hey,
que
Rogério, what happened? So, Tawana, the link that we had was from the previous event. The SAS event? Yes, that one. So I imagine that whenever people are trying to join, to subscribe to this one, they got the old link and not the new one. And actually, we got it yesterday, so it was a short notice. Well, we have some higher number of attendees here. Let's just wait a few more minutes, people. I apologize.
Oi? Deu certo, deu certo.
Gente, tá com 18 pessoas. Não sei se consegue.
Well, we have 18 attendees now. I don't know if we can share that link with your mailing list. I don't know how you do that. Rogério, did you speak to the people at training? Can they send the link back now? Rogério, have you spoken to people from training to send the correct link? Yes, I have. I sent that on the Teams group several times. I didn't get much attention from them this time. That's the truth. Well, I've been doing this since yesterday. We sent the link. I sent a message to Viviane as well. She didn't reply.
Das outras vezes, quando a gente iniciava, já tinha 50,
During the other
60.
sessions, when we started, we would have like 50 people in the room already. We now have 24. Well, since it's being recorded for YouTube, I think it's less of an evil, but I think, you know, this was very short notice. this preparation this time.
Dá mais uns 5 minutinhos.
Let's just wait for 5 more minutes, and then we can start. Do you guys have any mailing list that you take part on just to
Já mandei.
with the state managers? Yeah, I've sent them now on WhatsApp.
Grupo da Safe já mandei também. Já mandei
And the
agora.
dam
Por
safety
isso
one
não
as
é
well.
só aparecer,
Yes,
gente.
that's why people are coming in now.
Estavam perguntando lá no.
And people are asking about the link in the groups.
Mas lá você mandou o atualizado,
But
correto?
you sent the new one, right? The correct one. That's why we have new people coming in.
Isso.
Yes.
Já falaram que funcionou até.
Yeah, they are saying this is working now. Yeah, they're joining. So we have around 20 people right now, right?
Tem 45.
Well, we have 45 now.
contando
Okay,
com
so
a
it,
gente, né?
it does work.
Tem 33.
Including us, we have 33 from attendees and us.
Ah, é porque você vê aqui eu pensei que
Ah, so you can see that. I thought that was only us.
né? Já
So
pega
this is including everybody, including the people
tá
from
sem som, tá lá.
the attendees
Então,
list.
você clicando em participantes,
Yeah, if you
você
click in
vai
participants,
ele
you
mostra
will
as duas,
attendees. You can check the list,
Públicos.
os dois públicos.
both sides of the participants here.
Tenha um pouco de paciência aí, mas
I'll just ask you kindly for your patience for 2 more minutes, just for us to let everybody in.
Hi, Andy. Sorry for the delay. We're still waiting for some participants to join us, and we had a little problem with the link. Apparently, our training session at ANA sent the wrong link, so we are trying to make the participants receive the right one. So we're just waiting for a little bit more participants to join, and then we will start, okay? I'm sorry
Yeah.
for that.
No problem at all. It's good to see that these are international problems, not just American problems. So
Yes, yes, definitely.
Ó, já está subindo.
Well, we have some numbers coming up now. Okay, so can the people hear us? Can they all hear us? Yes. All right, so well, they can hear the background, how it happens behind the curtains, right? But it's okay.
Daqui a pouco a gente já começa.
We'll soon begin.
pessoal mandando o zap aqui dizendo que estão ouvindo a gente. É para ouvir
Okay,
mesmo.
people confirmed via WhatsApp that they can hear us.
Ouvisse, né?
Yeah, you're supposed to, okay?
Eu tenho
Ó, mais um minutinho aí, acho que pode começar depois. Já tem
I
60
think we
pessoas.
can wait for just 1 more minute.
I think we can start. We will record this. I hope Flashword is already recording. So we will have this on our YouTube channel. So for those who could not join us due to this technical problem, we will have the video in our channel. So I think there's no reason for us to delay even more. Let's get it started, okay? Podemos começar, gente.
Well, we can start, folks. I apologize for this delay and this confusion. We did have a technical issue with the links that we generated. Some people have received the correct link, some people got the wrong one, and this caused a little bit of this delay in the beginning of this workshop for today. We apologize, but you know, the video will be available on all of our networks, social networks. So if you didn't manage to come yesterday, it's okay. You can watch the video on YouTube, on Anna's YouTube, okay? We can start. I would like to let Felipe Sampaio to introduce. Thank you. Thank you, Tawana. Good afternoon to everybody who's watching us. I am Felipe Sampaio. I'm the director of the National Water Agency and Basic Sanitation Agency. It's a joy to be here with you for the 5th time for this one more workshop from this partnership between Anna and Usace. This agreement has been signed in the end of 2021, and one of the main focuses would be to train and improve the relationships regarding dam safety. So as we know, Usace has great expertise in this topic, and it is natural that we should hear from them and their experience in the subject. So for this topic about dam safety, what we look for in this workshop is to improve our training and institutional capacities and for inspection in dams in all states of the Federation. So in order to do that, we have had the first seminar in August last year. Usace has presented how they deal with dam safety training and the pertinent legislation, qualification, and risk management. On the second seminar, it was in September last year, we had the participation of the public entity in the United States that is responsible for dam safety in old dams. So in this opportunity, we dealt with different types of dams, the classification, their categories, and the different political and technical perspectives for planning, projects, design, construction, monitoring, and rehab for dams that are under MRCS. The third workshop dealt with the methodology for interventions and prioritizing those interventions and works in order to improve security of dams when we have a huge portfolio to manage. And lastly, in March this year, we had the fourth workshop dealing with internal erosion and causes for breach and disasters. So we had more than 1,500 people watching, which shows not only a huge interest in the topic, but also the importance of those workshops in terms of training our colleagues, our managers and inspectors in the many states and different governmental entities. Now we are gathered again for another one, talking about overtopping of dams. So this phenomenon is one of the main causes of failure of dams in Brazil and in the world, and that's why we have to go deeply into understanding and studying this. So I wish you all a great afternoon of work. I hope it's very productive, and I would like to say thank you to Usace for this partnership. And I would like to highlight that we all are learning together and that we are going to get more and more aligned with each other in these systems in order to implement the inspection with different entities and also talking and having great relationship with the owners as well, always taking care of those structures. So have a great day. I will now pass on the floor to our coordinator, our dam coordinators, Rogério Menescal. You have the floor. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Felipe, and dear colleagues. As Felipe has said, Anna and Usace has been they have been trying to discuss those topics that are very important to Brazil and Brazilian legislation, trying to include a little bit of the American experience. And this time, as Felipe said, we are now dealing with this topic that is the main cause of failure in dams, not only in Brazil, but worldwide. So this is a topic that is really important to share and talk about and hear from the American experience, and so that we can advance in our improvement of those implementation of national policies for dam safety. And I think that's it. Let's move on, and I would like to thank everybody for coming here. It's a very high quality team that you guys have on the other side in Usace. So I think Alan can speak a little bit now.
Ok, Rogério, obrigado.
All right, Rogério, thank you.
Também aqui trabalho aqui
I would like to say that I also work here at ANA with critical operations, and together with Felipe and Rogério. I would just like to introduce our lecturer, and then I'll pass on the floor to him. Andrew Hill is he's a civil engineer. He's a professional registered that is working currently as geotechnical senior engineer and session chief for geotechniques and also geology in the Center for Risk Management in the Usace. So he's been active for 18 years now, and he's been working a lot in Usace for now 15 years, 12 years of those 15 in the Center for Risk Management. He has developed the project and the construction of dams and dikes for many multiple uses of water, and projects for safety and for dam safety, and also for managing risk of flood risks, so at the same time. So he's also with the team of risk management, and in 2011 he's been the senior advisor for risks and safety and risks management for dikes and dams, advising and also being a co-author of more than 20 evaluation studies regarding issues related to dam safety and the assessment of risk in those structures. And he's also he has also been the leader of revision for more than 50 evaluations, risk assessment studies. So I would like to say welcome, Andrew, and I'll pass on the floor to you. And to the participants, I would like to welcome all of you, and also our supervisor for regulation in dam safety, Bruno Rebouças, who is probably trying to come in right now to join. And I have to say that I think everybody knows that, but we have a globe icon in your lower menu, and you can check the interpretation button there, and you can choose your favorite language there. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, we ask you to write that on the chat box or in the Q&A session. And by the end of the lecture, we will try and reply and answer all of your questions. All right, so I'll pass on the floor to Andrew Hill. Thank you so much for coming, sir. You have the floor.
All right, guys, can you hear me?
Sim.
Okay, great. Thanks for that introduction, and also thank you for the opportunity to speak to you guys. It's a real pleasure for me, so really appreciate the opportunity. So I am here to talk to you guys today about overtopping failure and assessing that failure for dams, and we're also going to talk a little bit about assessing the failure for levees as well. So here's some of the learning objectives that I think we're going to try to cover, which are going to be to identify the mechanisms that affect overtopping and wave overwash, and we'll talk about the difference between those two. Construct an event tree to represent overtopping, which is going to help us understand it and break it into individual pieces so we can help to understand how likely each one of those individual pieces is to occur. And that allows us to put the whole thing together and actually assess the likelihood of overtopping. We're also going to estimate the probability of breach or focus on overtopping failure probabilities with fragility curves. So that's actually kind of talking about the actual estimates themselves and the process. And I've also kind of added a couple of slides that represent sort of a case history of something I've dealt with in the past. And I've got a couple of those that we can talk about depending on how much time we have. So let's get into it. So failure of dams and levees due to overtopping, it's a pretty common failure mode. This indicates it composes about 30% of dam failures in the US. But I think internationally, that's probably closer to 50%, at least according to what Robin Fell put together based on a bunch of dam history back in the late 1990s. So we'll discuss key factors such as overtopping depth, duration, dam materials. So, you know, embankments that have overtopped by a few inches to any more than a foot, or I guess 0.3 meters, have performed well, but others have failed quickly. And that depends again on, you know, the depth of overtopping, the duration of overtopping or overwash, and the materials that the dam is actually made out of. So many older dams and levees have been designed for floods that no longer really represent a remote flooding event, and design estimates have increased. So, you know, everything in engineering progresses and moves on with time, and hydrology in particular can be affected by that. So, you know, back when things were designed back in the 60s, the 70s, you know, what have you, sometimes as we get more data about actual weather events and floods, we understand the likelihood of loading better. And so that means that some of these dams may be under-designed and may be more likely to overtop. So let's talk about a couple of case histories here. So this is Lake Delhi Dam near Delhi, Iowa in the United States. It failed on July 24th in 2010. So one spillway gate was not operational during this event. So you can kind of see it. Let me get my laser pointer here. You can kind of see right here, these two gates are up, but this gate is closed. And so the dam also underwent internal erosion. We're not really sure about the specifics of that, but it also overtopped this section right over here, a 200-foot portion of the earthen embankment and the roadway that led to breach and emptied the reservoir. So this was not a huge dam. It was about 4,000 acre feet. I should have had those numbers in cubic meters, but it's a small dam, relatively speaking. But you can see as this area was overtopping here, kind of, you can see another view of it overtopping here. And this is the same section after it failed. So you can see there was a pretty significant erosion event here. No life loss occurred, but about 8,000 people were evacuated from the downstream area. This is Auburn Cofferdam. So this was a cofferdam actually constructed in California to build a concrete dam that never actually got built. In early February 1986, 10 inches or about 25 centimeters of rain fell in the Sacramento region in just 11 days. And it melted a lot of the snowpack in the Sierra Nevada mountains and caused a huge flood to pour down the American River. So rising water overtopped the cofferdam near the right abutment, kind of right here. Creating a waterfall or, you know, an erosive overflow that quickly eroded into the structure. Although the cofferdam was designed with a soft earthen plug to fail in a controlled manner, if any such event were to occur, the structure eroded quicker than expected. So breach outflow surged downstream into the already spilling Folsom Lake, which is another dam downstream, less than a mile downstream, deposited the cofferdam debris in that lake, and then raised the lake level very quickly. Folsom Dam then, it started to move water through the spillway, and outflow reached 134,000 CFH, which is a ton. Again, I should have got that into cubic meters per second, but it's a lot, which exceeded the design capacity of the levees through Sacramento. But the levees were fortunately not overtopped, and severe flooding in the city was averted by a very close margin. But this is interesting to take a look at some of these pictures. So it initiated over here, and this, as it progressed, it eventually sort of downcut and then widened as it was downcutting. Here's a better view over right here. And I think this is an aerial view the remnant section here, and the actual flood. Pretty significant failure here. So this is Tom Sock Upper Dam. It's an upper reservoir of Tom Sock. So it's a pump storage dam. So essentially water doesn't flow into this. It's actually pumped up into it from a stream of, offsite that's used for water supply for the people who live in the area. And it was overtopped when water continued to be pumped from the lower reservoir after the upper reservoir was full. So you got to ask yourself, how does something like this happen? So it was a pretty crazy series of events that led to this. And it eventually led to the catastrophic failure of a triangular section of the reservoir wall, as you can kind of see right here and over here. The failure was a result of a combination of design and construction flaws, including continuing to operate the dam when the primary system for gauging the water level was known to be inaccurate. Excuse me. Specifically, the gauge pipes, which measured the water level, had become detached from the reservoir wall. So they were kind of moving around. So that moved the fail-safe secondary gauging system above the actual height of the dam to avoid false positives, which would cause a premature stop of pumping into the reservoir and operating the dam in an unsafe manner by routinely overfilling the reservoir. There was no overflow spillway in the original reservoir, so there was no place for the water to go once it did overtop. After this thing breached, no one was killed, but a downstream park superintendent, his wife, and his 3 kids were swept away while still in their home. So this is a really remarkable thing. We never would have thought that that was able to happen, but literally the house was picked up from its foundations and floated away while it was still intact. And so no one was killed, luckily. The dam of the lower reservoir, which was designed, which by design is able to hold much of the capacity of the upper reservoir, withstood the onslaught of the flood. By storing most of the deluge, it spared the towns downstream from a damaging flood, and the high water was stopped at Clearwater Lake, which is another lake downstream. So pretty remarkable. They built this back. It operates today, and hopefully they have a little bit better fail-safe mechanism to make sure that this thing does not overtop again. Here is another one. This is Rainbow Lake Dam failure. It failed in September of 1986 due to extreme rainfall in central Michigan in the United States. So Rainbow Lake Dam failed due to extreme rainfall. Yeah, the dam was 46 feet tall. So that would be, what would that be? So that'd be like what, 12, 13 meters, maybe 14 meters. And it's about 800 feet long, or let's say about 270 meters long, and had a 10-meter wide crest with 4-to-1 slopes and a rectangular drop inlet spillway, but no emergency spillway. It was constructed of well-compacted sandy, silty clay. So that's an important part of this. It's there was sand in there, there was silt in there, which are erodible materials. But there was also clay in there, which has a lot of erosion resistance associated with it, and a little bit of coarse gravel. But eventually the dam failed after being overtopped for 14 hours. With a max overtopping depth of about 1.5 to 2 feet, or somewhere in the zone of about 0.4 to 0.6 to 0.7 meters. An eyewitness stated that the erosion, which resulted in the breach and failure of the embankment, started in an area where vegetation cover was sparse or non-existent due to the presence of a road or trail angling down the downstream side of the embankment. So that's important to note. The grass cover on embankments provides a really robust, a very robust armor for the embankment itself. So if you look close at this photo right here, you can see some of these erosion rills kind of taking place. You can see water kind of flowing down through here. And we'll see some more of that here in just a minute. So here's another one. This is the Laurel Run Dam failure. It failed on July 20th, 1977 from a large flood. The cause of the Laurel Run Dam failure was attributed to an inadequate spillway design and stability issues, first identified as early as 1943. A dam assessment in 1959 noted that the spillway was less than half the size desired by the state. So this was a case where, you know, an older design back in I'm not even sure when it was originally designed, but before the 1940s, just didn't reflect the size of the flood that could actually occur. So in 1970, the dam was classified as high hazard, meaning the failure would have significant potential to cause loss of life and significant property damage. And in mid-July 1977, torrential storms hit the Johnstown area, dropping about 12 inches of rain, which is, what is that? It's almost 30 to 35 centimeters of rain in just 8 hours. This equated to approximately a 500-year storm. By 1:20 a.m., the water reached the top of the dam and began to spill over the dam crest. And about an hour later, overtopping, yeah, it is an hour later, right? Yeah, anyways. Overtopping of Lower One Dam scoured the downstream slope of the dam enough to cause the embankment to breach, resulting in complete failure of the dam. So this actually, 40 lives were lost, unfortunately, in the town of Tanneryville, Pennsylvania, all within the first 2.5 miles downstream of the dam, which the areas closest to the dam are the ones that are going to see the most severe flooding. So that's not a surprise, unfortunately. Virtually no warning for those in the flood path. This happened in the middle of the night. The breach was rather rapid, somewhere in about an hour after overtopping initiated. And the flood depths were very deep, particularly right there within the first couple of miles downstream of the dam. Note the lineations on the downstream side of the dam. So that's what these kind of weird things are right here. So those are actually thought to be due to crib walls that made up the original dam prior to placement of additional filter later in the life of the dam. So this was the original dam. Then they placed a larger dam over top of it. But anyways, just kind of interesting. So this is a concrete dam. So Gibson Dam, constructed in 1928, it's a concrete arch dam. It's about 200 feet high, or somewhere in the zone of about 60 meters, 65 meters. And in 1964, a record regional rainstorm in northern Montana. It was actually a potential precipitation maximum, probable maximum precipitation event. So a PMP. So basically it's our design storm, happened on a heavy snowpack. And so spillway radial gates, they were not fully open, and they led to overtopping. The controls weren't accessible. 2 gates were completely open, 2 gates were completely closed, and 2 gates were partially opened. It overtopped by about 3 feet over the parapet wall for about 20 hours, but did not fail. So let's take a look at that, a picture of that. So this is the dam itself. Obviously, this is a concrete dam. It's arched up into the reservoir. And these are the rock abutments that the dam was built on. And you can see a lot of overflow cascading down this rock. Here it is when it's not overtopping. And you can see that it was modified in 1981 by I think, it was modified in 1981 to allow overtopping of up to 12 feet. So it was designed now to overtop. And abutment protection and anchors were added. So you can see these concrete aprons here on the side. So if water does cascade over, it hits these concrete aprons and doesn't cause further erosion. One more here, I think, which is Hurricane Katrina. So this happened in 2005. So on the left here, this picture shows the South Eye Wall breach along the east side of the IH&C, or the Inner Harbor Navigation Canal, sometimes called the Industrial Canal. It was likely due to rotational failure of the eye wall after overtopping floodwater scoured the soil, supporting the backside of the protection. That's the prevailing theory. There's also a possibility that there was some internal erosion or some sort of infiltration of seepage in the foundation, which contributed to this. But even if that's the case, there are multiple locations in the Industrial Canal that failed due to overtopping of these walls. It's scouring out the backside material, and then these walls just fell over. And so it would all look like just like this. The flood control structures in this area had been replaced with T-walls. These are pile-supported, much more robust flood walls, pile-supported and can withstand a lot of overtopping. The residential area behind the failed wall is the lower 9th Ward, which you may or may not have heard And then here's Bayou Bienvenue off to the left. On the right side here, we have what used to be a levee. So this picture shows a section of eroded levees along the northeast ridge of the St. Bernard Protected Basin, kind of up here in this picture, fronting Lake Borgne and the MRGO, or the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet. Some things out to the east of New Orleans. The land side is to the left and the water side is to the right. So here's the land side, here's the water side. Sorry, got that backwards. Land side and the water side over here. And the embankment used to be about 15 to 17 feet in height, or about 5 to 6 meters in height. This levee section was constructed primarily with hydraulic fill materials that were dredged from the adjacent channel with little or no compaction. So this is sandy, silty material. And when this became overtopped, which as I recall was somewhere in the neighborhood of about 3 feet of overtopping or something like that, it just washed the levee away. There was no cohesive material in there. It was not compacted very well. There was nothing on the surface to really protect this levee very well. And so you can see it performed very poorly. Flood control structures have been replaced with large T-walls on clay levee sections in this area. So they've been replaced with much more robust flood control structures today. One more thing that happened during Hurricane Katrina in the greater New Orleans area. And so this is important and something that everybody should think about. Not all levees or dams that are overtopped fail. So this image, which looks south, shows a clay levee being overtopped by an unknown amount while being subject to storm-driven wave overwash. So this is the levee itself. This is the levee crest right here. These are bridge pilings right here, because there's a bridge that kind of goes right over top of this area. And you can see water cascading down. So this is sort of a scarp, an erosion scarp that's been formed. This used to be the toe of the levee. That's begun to erode away, but the levee's still there. It's still performing. I think this is like a wave crest coming over or something. I'm not sure what that is, but you can actually see the scour taking place here, which is really interesting. Over here on the right, this image shows a levee along the east flank of New Orleans East. This is all the way out to the eastern side. The levee along this section was constructed using clayey soils that were properly compacted at or near optimum moisture content. So this is ideally how all things would be constructed, with ideal materials. And so for reference, just southwest of this location, there were 5 major erosional breaches of levees constructed of hydraulic fill, like we saw on the last slide. So that also composed flood risk reduction for the same area in this levee section did. So this is a clay levee with a good grass cover. It looks great. No damage at all. I'm not sure if it was overtopped by quite the same amount that it was, but this was overtopped, and for a long time. So interesting to see how much the materials that we can make these levees out of, or dams, and how they're compacted change the likelihood of failure. Okay. So let's talk. Oh, I got one more thing I wanted to show you, which I thought was pretty interesting. These are some somewhat dramatic photos. So this is a section of a dam in Germany that was overtopped. You can see these erosion rills that came through. This is a closer look at so I think this, I don't know how long this thing overtopped, but heavy rain hit, and the reservoir rose. It overtopped, caused a lot of this rilling. This looks like clay materials, but there's no way to be sure. And here's a even better close-up of what this thing looked like. So this is pretty severe. And note that it's just not in one location, it's in multiple locations. So we'll talk more about that as we talk about the specific way that we would try to assess the likelihood of failure. But it's good to note that over an embankment, failure may not just happen in one location. It could happen in multiple locations. Something to keep in mind. So there's 2 ways for a dam or levee to overtop. And so overwash, which, occurs when the water surface is below the crest elevation of the structure and wind-driven waves wash across the crest of the structure. So the water level has not risen above the dam and started to overtop it. It's just waves overwashing this dam or levee. Another way is continuous overtopping, which occurs when water depth exceeds the crest of an embankment and causes it to overflow, resulting in continuous flow over the structure. This can be from a combination of still water level and wind setup. So I'm going to talk more about wind setup and what that is here in just a second. So breach can occur from either one of these, either overwash or continuous overtopping, or it can be from a combination of both. Though breach from overwash alone, which is just the waves, would likely require a long duration, or at least a longer duration. So this is important to note, and this is something we've only started doing in about the last 5 years. You have to consider these things in the same failure mode. You don't want to separate these out because it becomes difficult to sum the risk of these two together. So you want to consider how your structure is actually going to be loaded, and you want to model how that's actually going to happen. You know, if it's a river and you're considering a levee and there's just a river flood here and there's not really going to be a whole lot of wind, then you don't really need to consider overwash. But if it's a dam that has a large lake behind it that may have some wind pushing on it, then you want to consider the contribution of waves overwashing that, and then the actual overtopping event itself. And then as the water comes back down, will there be more waves, which could eventually fail the structure? So you need to consider all these things and model them for the actual structure you're looking at, ideally. Okay, so here's a graphic of what we were talking about. So this is our embankment right here. This is what we could consider essentially the still water level, kind of right here, right through here. So that is the area between the crest of the wave and the trough of the wave. And so what wind setup is the wind is blowing in this direction and it's stacking the water up against the levee or a flood wall or whatever structure you have there. And so it's actually increasing the height of the water. And then this wind is also pushing waves over. And so as these waves strike the sloped surface of the levee, they are driven up the surface of the levee and then may start to overwash that embankment. So that's wave run up is what that is. So here's our wave length. This is our wave height. Those are things that we can estimate given the amount of fetch or how much free space we have in front of the levee where wind can affect the surface of the water. And these are all things that we can use to develop some sort of a volume estimate of how much water is going to be passing over this levee during a storm. And it also, yeah, let me stop there. Okay, embankments and concrete structures, depth of overtop. So overtopping depth, duration, and type of structures are critical to evaluate an overtopping potential failure mode. Most embankment dams and levees would not likely withstand sustained overtopping of a foot or 2 or 0.3 to 0.6 meters or more without a high probability of failure. That greatly depends on a lot of things, but that's a good rule of thumb. Most concrete dams, however, can likely withstand a certain level of overtopping due to the robust nature of the structure itself. It's made out of concrete. It's likely got reinforcement in it, perhaps. You know, it's the concrete itself has a lot of erosion resistance associated with it, and the rock foundation that is built upon. Some dams may be vulnerable due to jointing and fracturing in the rock foundation. So as water overtops this concrete dam and cascades or falls down, it might actually erode the rock that the dam sits on, which would be bad. But we'll discuss embankment processes and event trees, and then some simple ones for concrete dams. So we're going to get into the actual assessment of embankment overtopping. So there's a couple of different ways that the erosion mechanism can occur. So the one shown on the left is a head cutting failure. So note the vertical face of a head cut that forms due to the presence of cohesion in the embankment material. So we have this vertical face right here. The breach mechanism on the left is a surface erosion failure, typically seen in cohesionless embankment materials. Both mechanisms may be applicable if it has cohesionless shells and a cohesive core. So, you know, what we have here is we're showing constant overtopping. And here's the head cut forming with, you know, the dam section being eroded away at the downstream end of the crest. And then this continues to move upstream until it eventually starts to lower the crest down. And then you get more and more water overtopping and eventually wipes this thing out. Similar but different for cohesionless materials. So it's important to note when this transfer from one mechanism goes to another. It takes very little fines content to go from here over into this breaching mechanism. So I'm talking about anywhere, you know, 5 to 10%, maybe even less, to actually come to a cohesive materials. Sorry about that. That's our doorbell. So most of the times that you're actually analyzing a breach mechanism for a dam or a levee, you're going to be looking at cohesive, this sort of head cutting failure. All right, so what are the key embankment erosion processes? So there's 4 steps, and these are really kind of broken out and used in modeling to actually assess the likelihood of overtopping. So first is surface detachment. You essentially have water overflowing the surface of the dam, and you start to pluck off these individual soil particles. And once that continues, you start to form a head cut that looks a lot like this. And so at that point, once you form this head cut, then the erosion mechanism changes a little bit. Then you have an impinging jet that goes and erodes the material. As you know, water cascades down and falls, it starts to erode that material. Meanwhile, so this is looking at a cross section of a structure. If you were to look at this structure straight on, that is upstream or downstream, it starts to widen out. So not only is it starting to erode down, it's starting to widen out. And while that's happening, this head cut is moving upstream. So as we continue to erode, this erosion occurs right here and continues to move up. And then the overlying material usually just falls down into the water. And so through that, the head cut migrates upstream. All right, so this is a series of pictures. I just want to make sure that everybody's hearing me okay and everything's going good. Get a thumbs up. All right, great.
Sim, Pedro. Tudo ok.
Yes, everything's okay.
Okay, great.
Pedro.
All right, let's keep on rolling then. So these pictures.
Pedro,
Yeah.
just a second. Só informar que
I'd just like to inform that we have a set of people who are now coming into the webinar. I'd just like to welcome all of them. There was a certain delay and a problem with the link to access this. I'd just like to say to everyone that we started the webinar some time ago, but it is being recorded. So if you missed the beginning, you can still watch it later, okay? But I just like to welcome all of you, and Andrew, you can go ahead now. Well, there were around 100 people who came in over the last 10 minutes, actually, so go ahead, you can continue.
All right, thank you, appreciate that. All right, so here we have a series of photographs which illustrates these erosion processes. So this is an erosion test. I think it's done by the NRCS. ARS, excuse me. And so what they essentially had was they had built an embankment and they diverted some water from a stream that was nearby and started to overflow this material. And so this is essentially kind of far into the process here, or has essentially water started to overflow the embankment section in this lowered section right here. And you see that we have not only have we lost our surface materials, our grass, our turf, which provides protection for the embankment, but we've also see this series of sort of like stair steps, which we can say is each one of these is a head cut has formed. So it looks like we have one head cut, two head cuts, three head cuts here that have formed at multiple locations on the downstream slope. As this progresses, these head cuts sort of start to come together and make one large head cut and continues to move upstream. And you can see that we are also starting to widen this breach out. So is this happening? This is probably happening as we start to continue to undermine, the water's falling over here. We're undermining the soils right adjacent to where it's actually striking the bottom of that waterfall area. It's also undermining the soils at the bottom of these side slopes. And these slopes are probably falling in as in chunks and then being washed downstream. And so this head cut is now migrating upstream towards, you know, our water source. And here we see it's continuing to move upstream. We've actually gotten past the crest. So now we're into the upstream slope right here. And this thing has widened out considerably. And then eventually we have a full breach. So we did have some sort of a head difference from the upstream to the downstream, but now we see there's very little head difference. We have a full breach. So let's talk a little bit about crest elevations. Accurate elevations across embankments, dikes, and levee crests are needed to evaluate overtopping. Recent surveys need to be performed to help identify low spots and areas vulnerable to flow concentrations. So these things change over time through, it may vary longitudinally, either through erosion events or settlement is a big one. Consolidation settlement of the embankment, regional subsidence due to mineral extraction or groundwater withdrawal, particularly in areas where there is a lot of soft soils that are recently deposited. Surveys of embankments, either levees or dams, are recommended to determine the crest elevation and identify low spots. There's many ways to do that these days, either by typical survey with a rod and a total station, or LiDAR where it's available. Lots of different ways to do that. So this helps to identify where overtopping is likely to occur first. So this is important because you want to understand where your low spots are, so that if you, number one, want to intervene, if you know the overtopping is going to happen, you know where to go to pile up some sandbags or something like that to decrease the chance that overtopping actually even occurs. But it also, when you're assessing the likelihood of overtopping, you know where to look. So do we have poor grass in this area? Is the embankment slope, in good shape in this area? Yeah. So also the crest can be lowered by other failure modes. So that could be seismic deformation if there's an earthquake. It could be by internal erosion. This would be pretty late in the internal erosion process, and likely, basically that's the initiation of breach, but something to be considered. Okay. So levee overtopping. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about hydrologic hazard curve, or the frequency of overtopping is the primary factor for this potential failure mode. That's really what drives this. There are several factors that may increase water surface elevations. These can include, debris blockage. So particularly of a spillway. So if we have debris that moves into a spillway, that's gonna inhibit our ability to actually move water out of the spillway. It's going to cause that water behind the dam to rise faster, and we are going to overtop prematurely. System operations changes and tributary inflows. So if we have some dams on upstream on our river or in other river tributaries, and they change how they decide to operate and decide to let more water through sooner, then that could increase the likelihood of overtopping. The original modeling technique. So if we did something 50 years ago, then likely, our techniques or our ability to assess the likelihood of overtopping or the likelihood of a flood at all probably has changed. Change in understanding of the potential inflow. We have a better period of record. We understand how rainfalls and floods happen better in particular areas or on rivers, or there's a change in estimated frequency overtopping may be more likely to happen. Crest settlement may increase likelihood for overtopping. So if we actually, the crest settles by, a half a meter or something like that, then obviously that's going to be much more likely to overtop. Or additions from bridges or other encroachments, which could be typically on levees, could cause that water to actually back up, and the height could increase upstream of that and start to overtop on each side of these levees. Maybe not so much of a problem on dams, unless there's a bridge that's over top of your spillway that hasn't been included in the actual design. Also, channel roughness changes, also typically a levee thing. So if you used to have a natural channel and you've made concrete, then that's going to increase the flow velocity, which could actually lower the water level. But let's say all of your slope protection gets roughed up or damaged, then that's going to slow things down and cause that water level to increase. Some additional factors influencing the likelihood of overtopping. Or really influencing the likelihood of failure given overtopping. So the depth and duration of overtopping is huge. It's a big deal. We said before, if there's like 0.3 to 0.6 of meters of overtopping, that's a bad deal. Some dams may fail before that. Some dams may be able to actually stand up under that type of overtopping, but it's rare. Camber or low spots on a dam or levee crest may concentrate overtopping flows. Downstream materials, slope protection, changes in slope or protrusions. So if we have a really erodible material on the downstream side, once we start to overtop that dam, it's going to erode away rather quickly and cause that thing to start to breach or erode more and then breach more quickly. If there's slope protection, like if we have riprap, large rock or something like that, or even concrete aprons or slope paving, that's going to be a game changer as well. So this says changes in slope protrusion. So, a lot of times we think that erosion may initiate on the downstream side of a dam where there's a change in slope, because the flow regime changes here a little bit, velocity changes or something like that. And that can increase the likelihood of erosion at these particular locations. Protrusion, well, if you have telephone poles every so often, that's water's going to scour around there like they would a bridge pier. Same if you have guardrails along the crest of your dam. Those can be huge, and they need to be considered when you're thinking about the likelihood of overtopping of your dams, especially if there's a road on top. Embankment crest materials, protection. Do you have a roadway on top? How much wind setup, how much wave run up and fetch is necessary to develop those things? How likely is your structure even to experience those things? If you have a dam with a huge lake behind it, then there could be a problem. If it's a river, maybe not so much. If it's the ocean, yes, that is going to be a very big deal. That's often what's going to drive the risk of coastal levees. May initially assume that any overtopping depth may initiate erosion progression to breach for a lower order study. That is, if you're trying to do a quick way to assess a lot of levee or a lot of dams, then you can just assume that if it overtops, it fails. Or if it overtops by a half a foot, it fails or something like that. But when you start to realize that, wait a minute, this one dam, it's going to cost us a lot of money to fix, or there's going to be a lot of life loss associated with that, then maybe we need to look at that a little harder. And so that's when we start to employ some of our better tools to assess the likelihood of failure. So fragility curves, system response curves should be developed based on site characteristics and structures for those more developed studies. We actually want to look at how long and by how much will this thing actually overtop, and what are the materials that this embankment is actually made out of that's going to resist that overtopping. Lack of a splash pad or surface protection behind flood walls, particularly eye walls, will make the materials directly behind the wall vulnerable to overtopping. That's a very big deal and was huge during Hurricane Katrina. We learned a lot of lessons there. Another lesson that we learned was that the transition from one type of flood protection to another, like where an eye wall or a wall comes into a levee, this protection, how that's protected right here, is a very big deal, because water is going to, as it overflows that wall, it's going to concentrate right there, and that's going to erode first. So you want to make sure that you've got that adequately protected with riprap or slope paving, something to that nature that's going to provide some erosion resistance there. And also mechanical, electrical controls for outlets. Are they still operational? So in an overtopping event, is your control tower underwater? I mean, nobody's going to be in there operating and throwing switches if they're underwater. So something to be considered. Embankment overtopping event. So, okay, so this is where we start to break this overtopping failure into specific events that we can actually put a probability to, or at least think about in a very controlled way. So the sequence of events leading to an embankment failure from overtopping, it kind of goes from, okay, a storm occurs and overtopping initiates. So what we would also consider is, excuse me, not only overtopping, but wave overwash initiates probably before overtopping does. So we have water overlapping this levee, and eventually as water continues to rise, then we start to overtop constantly. Okay, once we have overtopping or overwash initiated, then the vegetation or slope protection has to be removed to progress this failure. So that's typically some sort of grass, or, you know, if it's maybe not as much of a maintained levee, maybe there's some natural vegetation there. And you got to consider about, you know, how likely is it that is actually going to be, how likely is it that that material is going to be removed? If it's a smooth, uniform, thick grass, that may be have a lot of robustness to it. If it's woody vegetation that may concentrate flows, then maybe that's not going to help. Maybe that's going to make things worse. Once we lose that grass material, the next step is erosion of the embankment itself, of the actual embankment materials initiates. So cohesionless embankment, it would be along the downstream slope. For a cohesive embankment, maybe it's at the downstream end of the crest, kind of right here, or at a change in slope, and a head cut starts to form right there, or something like that. Essentially, you start to initiate erosion, and then you start to form that head cut. So particle transport or eroded material starts to transport downstream, and that head cut advances upstream until it hits the upstream end of the crest. So I'm trying to make a levee with my hand here, but so this starts to erode and come back upstream. And then once it hits that upstream crest and that starts to lower that crest, you've just initiated breach. So when you start to lose that hydraulic control and you start to lower your crest, you're getting more water over now, because the upstream surface really isn't going to change yet. It's just going to be a deeper overtopping. So it's going to be more and more erosive force. And so the embankment crest is lowered and breach occurs. I don't know if this is a good place to stop for questions. There's a couple of questions. I don't know. Maybe those aren't questions. I don't see any question marks. Let's just keep going. Okay, so here it is. This is typically embankment overtopping event tree as we would assess it during a risk assessment. So these contain nodes that actually that a team doing a risk assessment would actually put estimates to. The nodes are constructed based on the the site characteristics, and the modeling studies performed for this failure mode. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So in this example, the team combined surface protection failure and head cut initiation. Let me take these one at a time. So flood load results in overtopping, overwash. So we have overtopping. So we have a reservoir elevation. Let's say the dam crest is 945. So we break that up. If it's less than 945, where we don't have overtopping, but we might have some wave overwash. So there could be some failure associated down here. In this particular event tree, we don't show that failure is actually possible here, but maybe we could take this event tree and we could cut and we could paste it down here and assess this part of the tree for just wave overwash and this part of the event tree for overtopping. And then we would add the two together to get the total estimate of failure. So reservoir elevation, break it up into not just overwash and overtopping, but maybe we might break it up into different depths of overtopping, because our likelihood of failure changes for 0.3 meters of overtopping, 0.6 meters of overtopping, a full meter of overtopping, etc. Next note. So once overtopping or overwash initiates, then surface protection of downstream slope fails and head cut initiates. So these two things got put together. We had them as separate events here, but really once we lose that surface protection and we start to initiate erosion of the actual soil of the embankment itself, we immediately start to form some small head cut. So we put those together because it's almost like the same thing. So once we initiate that head cut, then it's all about, okay, that head cut starts to deepen. It starts to get bigger and it starts to move upstream. And once that moves upstream and hits that upstream crest, that's an important point, because if it goes beyond that, it's going to start to lower that crest and we've initiated breach. So we can put a likelihood to each one of these events. And when we multiply all those likelihoods together, then we have an estimate of the failure. That's the thinking behind this. So predicting embankment, overtopping, breach, and breach parameters. So this whole presentation is part of our best practices series, which is what that chapter C1 is. This is available on the Risk Management Center website, which is free for everybody to go and take a look at. I encourage you to do so. There's a lot of good stuff on there, including some tools to help you understand the likelihood of each of these nodes better by doing some screening analyses. So here's a couple of different levels of risk assessment. So actually, here's that website right here. Here's the web address down here at the bottom. Make this a little bigger so I can talk to this. So a couple of different levels of study. So at a screening level event, where maybe we don't put in as much effort into the study, it's less expensive, it takes less time to do. We would estimate if breach occurs based on familiarity with existing case histories. Personal experience, if you have a lot of experience dealing with these types of failure modes or something like that. Essentially, it's a low level of effort. So assume the embankment fails either at incipient overtopping for a cohesionless embankment. So once it overtops, it's done because we just don't think there's a lot of resiliency there. Or within approximately 1 foot or 0.3 meters of overtopping, which could be more of a clay embankment with any significant duration, 2 to 4 hours. To estimate, once that dam breaches, we want to know how much water gets out. And so we would do that by estimating the breach parameters, or how big that breach gets. And so we've got some empirical equations that we can use to predict that, such as Zhu and Zhang, a Froelich equation, von Thun equation. And then so that's essentially kind of what we're trying to do with this estimating the likelihood. We've estimated the likelihood of breach and how big that breach is, so we can estimate the consequences or how much water is going to get downstream. If we want to spend a little bit more time on our risk assessment, then we can do some H&H analysis or some hydrology and hydraulics analysis to estimate some of those breach parameters, such as using HEC-RAS. User entered inputs, either empirical equations or other parameters. So we can also use some simplified physical breach methods, velocity-based time relations. I think this is Windam. And then for a more rigorous, where this is an important dam to us, and so we're going to throw everything we got at it. It's going to be physically based breach models. So we'd actually run breach models to help us understand the likelihood, not just of what those breach parameters or how big that breach is, but how likely each one of these nodes is to occur. So we can use some of these models to help us inform our judgment when we're assessing the likelihood of this occurring. So some of those tools include Windam. So it's calibrated or designed for cohesive, homogeneous embankments. So uniform clay embankments, and head cut migration. It includes vegetation, so we can model like a grass layer on there, and material type factors. There's also NWS breach. That models cohesionless or sandy materials. Again, homogeneous and sediment transport. Things breach really fast in that model, as I recall. And then some more recent models include HR breach and Embrea, which I think came out of Europe, the European Working Group. They can model heterogeneous embankments or embankments that have zones in them. And they can utilize both erosion mechanisms that we talked about before, head cutting erosion or just surface erosion. So what's the best practice? So combining results from several equations, assumptions, and conducting sensitivity analyses is one for higher order risk assessment. So there's something really important in what I just said. Sensitivity analyses. This guy right here. These breach models vary greatly based on what parameters you use to model, particularly the soils. I'm saying that because I'm a geotechnical engineer. I'm sure a hydrologist would say they vary greatly based on the hydrology you put in it. So it's probably both things. But you can make these, you can drastically change the results of these models based on the parameters you put into it. And it's hard to estimate those parameters. And so the best practice is you take a best guess at what you think those parameters are, such as the likelihood for you know, a certain soil to erode. You think, what's the best estimate of that? What's a high estimate of that? And what's a low estimate of that? And then you run all three of those, or a whole suite of things in between there to understand how sensitive the results are to those input parameters. Because those parameters are hard they're hard to assess. So this gives us an understanding of the range of performance. And we need to define the limit state, you know, how much overtopping is it going to take to fail to inform the judgment. Vary the initiating hydraulic event, soil inputs, you know, just like we talked about. And then you can even use some of those and run some Monte Carlo analyses if you can fit a distribution to those values in their results. Let me show you just real quick about what some of this. So this is an output of a wind dam run, or this is actually the midpoint of a wind dam run. But essentially what it is modeling is you start with a dam cross section, and then we're going to put some water on it, and we actually put a hydrograph in there. And so we can estimate how long and by how much this dam is going to overtop. And then the model runs. This is our profile. And we see that this dam is failing. So we had this, the water came over here like this. We started to form a head cut right here. It got bigger and bigger and moved upstream until it came all the way down to here. And you can see we have now failed the dam. So this is looking at the dam in cross section. This is looking at a plan view of the dam from overhead. And this is essentially how this head cut that we see here is widening. So that's essentially what this wind dam thing does. It says, okay, if I put these certain erodibility parameters into this model and I run my hydrograph over it, is it number one, likely to fail at all? And if it does, how fast does it fail? Important things. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that. If we have time, I have a case history that we can step through real quick, but we should probably keep on moving here. So concrete dam overtopping, factors influencing likelihood of failure, depth and duration of overtopping, again, important. Foundation conditions at this, you know, as this water kind of falls across here and impacts this rock abutment. Is it jointed? Is it fractured? What's the bedding orientation and spacing? What's the erosion resistance and durability of this rock in the first place? Is there tailwater down here that's going to basically kind of absorb that impact and decrease the energy? Mechanical electrical controls still operational, you know, yeah. Here's a concrete dam overtopping event tree. Very similar, well, actually a little bit more simplified. So we've broken the hydrologic loading range up into more ranges here. So this probably isn't overtopping. This is overtopping a little bit, and these are different depths of overtopping. And then erosion initiates, erosion undermines dam, dam fails. So you can put a probability to each one of these nodes. All right, let's run through some uncertainties and different inputs into this analysis or that we're doing here. So the hydrologic hazard, you know, what's the likelihood that this thing gets loaded by some water and it actually overtops it all? So the size and shape of a flood hydrograph may vary depending on the peak and volume considerations and variations in the type of flood. Is it a thunderstorm or is it a rain on snow flood event? Or is it a sort of like a hurricane event? Or is it some sort of a atmospheric river coming in from the coast? Hydrologic hazard assessments may have been based on short records or anchored to design floods. We prefer to have long periods of record with a lot of data. May not always be available. Large uncertainties in flood hazard due to lack of data or reliance on older analyses. So, you know, I'm sure a lot of you guys know our ability to do these hydrologic analyses changes pretty regularly, and we get better at it. So yeah, that can change over time. The peak and volume of flood with the same return period as the original inflow design may have changed over time. And so once we understand how much water is going to come into the system, how do we route that flood for an embankment? And, you know, so how do we turn how much volume comes into the system into an actual height on our dam? So what's the starting reservoir elevation, reservoir operations at the time, or is it going to be misoperated? What's the spillway discharge? And have there been any modifications to the spillway since it was created or since that analysis was done? Initial antecedent reservoir water surface elevation. Starting reservoir water surface elevation can be a critical input for flood routings. The default elevation may be the top of the active conservation storage. Top of the flood control, essentially at the base of the spillway or at the spillway sill. But historical reservoir level data may indicate the reservoir is at this level at a small percentage of the time. So are we being overly conservative? Do we want to be overly conservative? If a starting reservoir elevation is significant, flood routing should consider this variable and results incorporated in the event trees. Consideration for starting reservoir elevation should also include time of the year and when the flood is likely to occur. Is it in the spring? Is it in the fall? And is that starting elevation going to be different in those two times? Reservoir operations, misoperations, assumptions regarding reservoir operations for flood routing should be evaluated for reasonableness. Like, will we actually do that? If a gated spillway operation will exceed downstream safe channel capacity, will those operators actually operate them? Will they choose to flood people downstream? If not, then they may overtop and things may get even worse. Gated spillways may be vulnerable to one or more gates failing during flood. We saw a couple of case histories of that. Due to mechanical failures, loss of power, gate binding, perhaps the operation controls are underwater. Sensitivity routings can evaluate variable assumptions. Again, sensitivity analysis is always a good idea. Spillway discharge. Those discharge curves used in flood routings are often based on idealized discharge curves, which may not happen in reality. Approach conditions that are less than ideal may reduce the discharge from what was assumed. Debris can move into the spillway and block it. For a gated spillway, flow will vary at a given water surface elevation depending on whether free flow or orifice flow conditions exist. Can we move that Tainer gate all the way out of the way so we can just get free flow? Embankment performance during overtopping. You need to be careful when we're considering overtopping load partitions. That means, do we want to assess overtopping at 0.3 meters, 0.6 meters, and 1 meter? Or can we just assess it at 1 and have a good understanding of the likelihood of failure? Overtopping duration is a key parameter. It's a big difference if something overtops for 2 hours versus 20 hours. And then the surface protection. Is it grass? Is it riprap? Is it bare soil? If it's grass, how well is it taken care of? Is there bare spots all over the place? Embankment zonation. Is it a clay core with a rock shell? That's pretty good. Are there changes in the downstream slope where changes in flow could occur and erosion may initiate there? What's the erosion mechanism? Is it head cutting or surface erosion? Again, probably usually going to be head cutting. Debris and overtopping flows. So can that concentrate in flows and accelerate erosion? A good example of that is in a dam. There could be a lot of debris back there, a lot of fallen trees. And as water comes up, those trees move into the reservoir. And as you're overtopping your embankment, some of those trees may move and just park right on there. And then that's a place for water to concentrate around as it flows around that tree, and it could initiate erosion even faster. Tough to wrap your head around that stuff sometimes. Is there crest paving? And does it really do anything for you? So you may think that crest paving is a great thing, but think about our erosion process. If we form that head cut and it advances upwards, so we're cascading water, it's eroding down here and then failing that material, well, it's not going to care if a roadway's there, especially if it's asphalt. That's just going to crumple right down in there. As that head cut moves forward, it's just going to fall right down in just the same as the rest of it. Excuse me. If you're going to do some erosion models, those soil erosion parameters are very huge. Your erodibility coefficient, your KD, will completely change the direction of that or the results of your analysis. So again, good idea to do sensitivity analysis. There's something that I try to adhere to all the time. You want to use models to inform your judgment, not be your judgment. All models are wrong. No model is good enough to completely model reality, but some models may be useful, especially if you use them appropriately. So use models to inform your judgment as a professional, as someone who has experience in dealing with erosion of soils and stuff like that. Use these models in that way. They're extremely sensitive to KD and potentially critical shear stress. KD is hard to estimate. There's good data out there for clays, less for sands, almost none for gravels. We're trying to work on that through some research, but it's tough. And again, their models live in a simple continuum. And they are nowhere near as complicated as reality. So just use these to inform your judgment. All right, almost there. Key takeaways. Overtopping flow and wave overwash could be a potential failure modes for both dams and levees. Consider them together. The specific erosion mechanism depends on the material the embankment is composed of, cohesive materials, cohesionless materials, and whether or not it deals with head cutting or sediment transport. A combination of both can occur. You're probably likely going to be dealing mostly with head cutting because it takes a small amount or small percentage of cohesive materials to change that mechanism. Somewhere 5 to 10% fines, and you're probably in head cutting territory. Depth and duration of overtopping are key factors. Erodibility of earth and embankments material is a key factor, and erodibility of the rock foundation is a key factor for concrete dams. So we can break here and answer some questions. I have a few more slides about a case history, but maybe this is a good opportunity to kind of address some questions before we go into that.
Perfeito, Adriel. Eu vou fazer as
Perfect, Andrew.
perguntas.
I'm going to be asking the questions.
Okay.
First question is actually in English. In case of a parapet wall on the crest of an embankment dam to prevent overtopping, how can it change the dam break study? Did you get that, Adriel?
Yeah, I did. So good question. So typically, a lot of times when you have these parapet walls, they're only designed to take wave forces. That may not always be true, but it can be. So number one is if you get static water on there, not waves, but actually a full water load, is it just going to fail and is it just going to overturn and fail from that? That's number one. Number two, as water continues to rise, you're going to get waves crashing over that and start to erode that material behind the wall. And eventually water may rise up above that and actually cascade constantly over and erode that material. So what is the wall composed of? Is it a pile supported wall? If so, it's probably pretty robust. Most parapet walls on dams are not pile supported. And so once you remove that material on the back side of the wall, that wall is going to lose its resisting force, and it's going to be much more likely to overtop. So you want to make sure that your hydrologic analyses is taking advantage of that wall and it's modeling that it's actually there, so you can actually know if it's going to overtop by either waves or constantly. And then you need to assess, given that overtopping, how likely is it to fail? And what is the mechanism it's going to fail? Did I answer that question appropriately? Hopefully that helps.
Acho que sim. Próxima pergunta.
The next question
Rony, tá em português, tá?
is
Qual a
in
diferença
Portuguese. What is the difference
entre o colapso de
between the
barragens de
collapse
terra,
of
enrocamento,
earth,
e de concreto, massa?
rock dams and mass concrete dams?
Ambos os casos
Both
pressupõem
cases
erosão.
presuppose erosion.
No primeiro tipo,
In
no
the
primeiro
first
caso,
type,
não seria
as the
muito
rock
mais
dams,
crítico,
wouldn't it be much more
pois o
critical
material tem menor
since the
coesão e
material has less
permeabilidade do que o
cohesion
concreto?
and permeability than concrete?
I don't know if I caught all that at the same time. So I think you're asking about the difference between breach of a rock-fill dam versus a concrete gravity dam.
Yes, that's right.
And the second part of the question, I didn't really, so I think I heard a permeability piece in there. But
yeah,
so
the question is, which one would be the most critical one? Because, earthen dam will have less cohesion and permeability than the concrete. So earthen dam will be, the collapse of an earthen dam will be more critical.
I agree with that. So, so as far as earthen dams go, obviously something made out of sand is going to be, it's going to perform terribly given overtopping. If it's made out of clay, it's going to perform better. If it's made out of rock fill, it's likely going to perform even better. However, something like a gravity dam made out of concrete or roller compacted concrete will will perform the best. So when we get into that zone of a roller compacted concrete or a concrete gravity dam, those things are basically not erodible. And so now you begin to consider the abutments that these concrete dams tie into. That's the weak point. And so we always want to look at the weak point of these systems. And once you transfer over to a concrete dam or roller compacted concrete, that's going to be what you're looking at. And then you need to consider the couple of different failure mechanisms, sliding, overtopping, etc. And when you're overtopping that dam, how much does erosion of those abutment materials change the likelihood of that sliding, that overtopping, etc. But if you're looking at a rock-filled dam, I mean, it's tough. It's like we talked about a couple of minutes ago. We don't have a lot of erosion parameters for rock fill. So other than to say that they likely would perform better than a truly earthen dam.
Right. Thank you, Adrian. Just a personal question on that side. Is there a reference guideline, technical guideline or document from Usace about those parameters that you mentioned?
Yeah, so what I would use, not really. Okay. So we have, let me see if I can bring it up here.
So they're mostly in the literature, right?
Yeah. Hopefully I can get to this, but it's the risk management center. Yeah, it's not going to let me do that. So if you get on the Risk Management Center website, which again, this guy right here in the blue box, there are some Excel spreadsheet tools that has essentially takes advantage of the existing research out there from Benelli, a lot from Hansen and Simon, and one other, can't remember, it's escaping me right now, but essentially what we've done is we've taken all that research and tried to compound it and come up with critical shear stress values. And so what we're trying to get at is we want to sort of, in these breach models, we're modeling how much water goes over and then how much shear stress that imparts on the soil itself. And then we compare that to the critical shear stress or shear resistance of the soil. And so it's that shear resistance of the soil that's hard to understand. And I think that's what the person is asking about. So really, it's just a combination of research out there, and we try to pool all that together and then put it in sort of like a spreadsheet tool. And so you can find that, you can play with it. There is some, I think, user guides being developed for those. And so I would encourage you to explore that.
Ok, thank you. E complementando agora em português.
Adding to that, now in Portuguese,
os modelos hidráulicos são os mesmos para ambos os tipos de
are
barragem?
the hydraulic models the same for both kinds of dams?
Yes. Yeah. So the hydrologic model doesn't care about what the structure is made out of. It just cares about the shape of it, the crest elevation of it as it goes from, one abutment to the other. And like all the characteristics of the reservoir upstream and the river system upstream.
Uhum. Ok, seguindo aqui com as perguntas.
Following with our questions.
Temos várias perguntas aqui, mas eu
There
vou
are
seguir com
various
elas,
questions
tá?
here. I'm going to keep on going with them.
Okay. What is the recommended tool to consider overtopping flow and wave wash together? Any specific model? Joana Pasqualini.
Yeah, so that's honestly where that is state of the art right now.
Okay.
And we're trying to kind of figure that out ourselves. So a lot of the things that we have done in the past, so we have, using the Eurotop equation, we have come up with, so we have a hydrograph. So sorry, let me back up here a little bit. So we've run some of these analyses, particularly on levees, particularly on coastal levees. And so we estimate the duration of a storm, such as a hurricane, which generate waves. And so then we estimate the peak wave height and then the peak wave period. And using the Eurotop equation, we can estimate the volume of water that's going to be put over a levee during that storm. We've also, on the flip side of that, we have asked one of our universities here in Colorado to run tests to basically see how much water they can put over a grass slope before we start to lose that grass. And so we get an understanding of, okay, we can put 1,000 cubic meters over a really good grass surface before we start to lose it. And so then we compare that to our estimate of how much of the volume of water going over a levee during the storm. And then now we can start to understand how likely it is that we lose that grass. Once we lose that grass, then we can run through our typical event tree. It looks like this. And so that's how we're starting to combine these things together. Now, specifically, when you combine waves with a constant overtopping event, a lot of times on a dam, we basically just kind of use a little bit of judgment for the wave overtopping part, because most of the erosion is going to occur from the constant overtopping itself. where wave overtopping really drives the risk is on levee systems, for various reasons. But so when you're assessing a dam, we may run some breach analyses to estimate constant overtopping, but we may use our judgment to say, you know what, it's probably going to be a little bit worse because there's going to be some wave overwash before that and after that. And so that may be more of a judgment to put those two things together on a dam.
Okay, thank you. Another question. It seems to me that the protection of the downstream phase is a kind of a parachute in the context of dam failures. Should we start demanding this type of protection for all dams, regardless of size?
So I think the answer to that should be, let's design our dams not to overtop at all.
Okay.
You know, so typically anytime that we see dams that have riprap on the downstream side, that's almost more because the shell materials are susceptible to erosion from rainfall. And so we don't want rainfall to come and erode the surface of our dams. And so a lot of time we'll just put riprap or stone protection on those. So when you start to, the best, if you want to plan for your dam to overtop, I would suggest making it out of RCC or something like that. You know, trying to design a dam to overtop using soil, it's very difficult to do and maybe impossible. So that would be my answer to that question.
Okay, thank you. Duas perguntas a mais e
Two
pedido
more questions and one request.
Como o mercado americano entende o uso de drones para inspeções visuais
visual inspections
e para comunicação da população,
to the population downstream,
utilizando alto-falantes no caso de risco de rompimento?
In the case of a breach risk.
Okay, yeah, good questions. So we're starting to embrace the use of drones for remote inspection, especially on levees, because they're very long and sometimes they're sort of hard to get to. In the case of dams, those are usually relatively short. You know, maybe they're a kilometer or two long, so it's easy to walk those. It's easy to drive out there and check it out. But more and more, we are using drones to look at the condition of the dam slopes themselves, such as the grass, as far as seeing how, you know, if there's any settlement going on, if there's some erosion happening. We're starting to use more and more LiDAR. I don't know if that you guys are familiar with LiDAR, but to help us understand how the surface elevation of the dam slope, of the dam surface itself changes. Second question, you know, you're getting into warning systems. And so what's some of the most effective warning systems we use now? So certainly emergency warning systems like sirens and loudspeakers for towns that are directly downstream of a dam are important. We've always, I think we've encouraged that, and it's great if they have those. Something we call reverse 911, which is essentially a message goes out on everybody's cell phone in a particular area that there's an impending dam breach or something like that. That's really effective. So I think we try to employ, it's good if a community employs as many of those things as possible. It's our job to make sure that we accurately model what is actually going to be done should a breach occur. That's kind of like, as an assessor or as somebody who studies dams, that's my job. If I was advising a community to employ some of these things, I would say sirens are great. Emergency broadcast, like on television and radio, is great. And I guess emergency messages over cell phone, even better.
Ok, obrigado. E uma pergunta agora sobre para que servem as árvores de eventos. Na verdade, é isso.
What those event trees are useful for. I think
a utilização de árvores de eventos serve para subsidiar a elaboração de estudos de ruptura, definindo os mecanismos de falha para simulação numérica.
simulate numerically?
Yeah, that's right. So event trees, you would create a unique event tree for each potential failure mode. And then we would use each event tree to assess the likelihood of that event, of that potential failure mode. And so essentially, so I've got one up here. Maybe this is best to employ using our So in this assessment, in this example that we have here, we created an event tree for overtopping. And then we got together as a group of, people who have experience looking at overtopping. We talked about it. And then we would, in a quantitative risk assessment, we would provide an estimate of event 1, like a probability. There's a 60% chance of it happening. And then for event 2, if event 1 happened, then what is the likelihood of event 2 happening? Let's say it's a 40% chance happening. And then given that all the events occur, what's the event that number 3 happens? Or the chance that number 3 happens? That's 90% or something like that. So in a quantitative estimate, we would do that. If we were doing something a little bit more qualitative, which is a simpler analysis, then we would use these event trees to help guide the discussion of how likely this failure is to occur. So in this particular case history, we were doing a quantitative assessment. So we used this event tree to help guide the discussion. And then we all together elicited. So I have 1 here repeated over and over again. This is actually elicitor 1, elicitor 2, elicitor 3, 4, 5, blah, 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 blah. So we had like 10 people here eliciting. And this is what they all thought. So high PMF, come up here, high estimate of PMF, peak depth of overtopping, just over 4 meters. PMF, peak depth of overtopping, 0.5 meter. And so most people thought it would require the high PMF to fail this dam. A few people thought it was, which would be a little over 1 meter. A few people thought it was the PMF, which would be 0.5 meter. Some people thought it was between there. And so our consensus, what we decided as a group was that it was likely require somewhere about 1 meter to actually fail this dam. And it was this event tree that helped us have a conversation about it and understand it better as a group.
Perfeito. Obrigado, Adriel. E pedido aqui,
Thank you, Andrew. And just one
qual é o
request
nome
here.
da
What
barragem
is
do
the
slide
name of the
27
dam in this slide number 27?
e a localização dela, por
And
favor.
where is it?
Come to here. 27, this guy.
Yes.
So this dam there is the same as, so that's Gibson Dam. So
What's the name again? If you could, I know,
Gibson,
write it in the chat.
Gibson Dam.
Okay, Gibson Dam.
Yeah. And for 27, this dam over here, I'm not sure which dam that is. I don't know. I'll try and track that down. I'm sorry, I don't have that information.
Okay.
We should get that on the slide.
Send that later. E última pergunta, de onde vêm as
And the last question,
probabilidades
where do you get the
utilizadas
probabilities
nas
that
árvores de
you use
eventos?
in the event trees?
It's an excellent question. And so this goes back to professional engineering judgment. And so that's based on, your schooling, your experience with these types of things before, your experience in seeing and trying to understand the erosional process. But judgment can be informed. And so judgment can be informed by some of these breach models that we talked about before. We can run some of these wind dam analyses to help us understand, it's going to take, our dam, based on our breach model, we don't think a half a meter will fail it, but if a full meter of overtopping will likely fail that dam. And so we start to understand the likelihood of failure using these tools to help us put into these event trees and understand and give us our nodal estimates. So anybody can do it. Anybody can provide these nodal estimates or these likelihoods of failure. But it's good to study up. It's good to understand all the site characteristics of the specific dam you're looking at. And it's good to run some sensitivity analyses or some just analyses in general to help you better understand how these things will perform.
Perfeito. Eu recebi também um pedido aqui para projetar a figura de uma barragem no Brasil, mas eu não vou conseguir projetar aqui, senão eu tiro a sua apresentação. Eu só descrevendo a figura de uma barragem pequena de terra, semelhante às que você mostrou, que foi galgada, que teve o transbordamento e depois depois do transbordamento ficou intacta. Provavelmente em função das características geotécnicas dela, né? Então eu vou continuar, devolvo a palavra aí para o Edrio. Eu acho que ainda tem uns slides que ele queria mostrar. Então eu agradeço as perguntas de todos aí, muito interessantes. Vou passar aqui de volta para o Edrio continuar a apresentação.
Keep going. You have the floor.
Okay, we got a couple more minutes here. So I'll run through this real quick case history. So I'm going to talk about Lopez Dam. This is not Lopez Dam. I was going to talk about a different one. This is actually Joe Pool Dam, and we can talk a little bit about this. I have some information on that as well. But I want to talk about Lopez Dam, which is a small dry dam in the United States. Let me bring this back up here. The primary risk driving potential failure mode was overtopping for us. The frequency of overtopping is relatively frequent. I think it's like 1 in 10,000 year event, and potential life loss, and economic consequences are very high. So this is directly upstream of a major US city in California. And so, it was important for us to understand the consequences of failure. So here's a better picture of the dam. Sorry about that last picture. So it's a zoned earth dam. It's a dry dam. There's another dam upstream of it up here, which helps regulate the inflow. But what we're looking at is an embankment here. This is the spillway. There's a little diversion structure, a little conduit to release water. Essentially, the embankment is the important part to understand. Here is a cross section of that embankment. You can see that the impervious zone is right here in kind of pinkish or whatever. So that's more of a cohesive material. And then we have a random pervious zone that's composed of probably a mix of cohesionless and cohesive materials. The impervious material, it's got a PI of non-plastic material to 7, so 0 to 7. So there's some cohesion there in this material. So this is going to be sort of a head cutting failure mode for this. And this could be anywhere from a head cutting to sort of a surface erosion erosion mechanism here. So let's keep going. This dam has never been overtopped. The pull of record has only been to about 60% of the dam height. It's denoted by this blue line. Here is a profile of the dam. So this basically just kind of shows us what the materials are made out of. The crust is relatively flat. Here's our spillway. It's pretty small. So then we get into hydrologic hazard. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to put together all of the pieces and parts that we need to understand and assess the likelihood of failure of this dam. So if overtopping were to occur at this dam, this would be what the hydrograph would look like. And so this green line is the pool elevation over time. So, and this is the reservoir elevation. So this line right here is the crest of the dam. So you can see if there is a huge event, a huge storm, so about 48.4 inches of rain, which, what is that going to be? That's like, I think over like a meter, meter and a half of rain, and probably about a 24-hour period. So we get some sort of a flood that comes down river, and then the reservoir elevation will rise until it rises up above our crest elevation right here. And we actually overtop the dam for, I don't know, probably about 3 or 4 hours or something like that. Up to 3.9 feet of overtopping for probably up to about 4 or 5 hours. So that is our overtopping event that we want to assess the likelihood of. So how likely is that event to occur? How likely is it that we get an event that looks like this? We use our stage frequency curve to estimate that. So our PMF comes in, and it's pretty infrequent. It's about 1 in 10,000, 1 in 20, 1 in 30,000, sorry, about 1 in 50,000, excuse me. So, you know, it's unlikely, but still more frequent than perhaps other dams in other areas of the United States. So we have some estimates of the potential, the PMF, or the potential maximum flood. So here is our best estimate of the potential maximum flood right here at 1302. That results in 1.6 feet of overtopping, or about half a meter of overtopping. Our high estimate of the PMF, which is not shown on here, but somewhere between the red and the blue line, results in about 4 feet of overtopping, or about 1.3, 1.2 meters of overtop. So we have an estimate of how much it overtops, and we have an idea of how frequent it overtops. Then we also want to help us understand, should the dam overtop and fail, what are the consequences associated with that? Well, in order to understand how much water will get out of the dam should it fail, we want to estimate the breach parameters. And so we've done that by running some HEC-RAS analyses that will essentially model a dam breach and help us understand how big that breach gets. And so we have things like breach top width is 226 feet, or about 80 meters. The bottom width is something more like, I don't know, 50 meters. Side slopes are 1 to 1, so about a 45-degree angle. And so our peak outflow at different size storms or different size floods goes anywhere from 50,000 to 74,000 cubic feet per second. Sorry, this is the peak outflow right here. So from over 100,000 to 140,000 CFS, which again, apologies, it's not in cubic meters. So we're trying to put all that together. So we want to assess the likelihood of overtopping. So to do that, we want to assess the performance. So now we have our event tree that we talked about before. This is common. We use a similar event tree for overtopping, no matter what dam or levee we're looking at, as long as it's a soil embankment. So it would be a little bit different if it was a concrete embankment. And then we think about, okay, so this now is the crest of the dam. So this is looking at the dam from upstream to downstream. So a longitudinal section of the dam. And so this is our crest elevations of the actual dam. This was designed, the red line is design, and this is a recent survey from 2019 right here. So we pick a critical location, and we pick this critical location. We would have picked the low point of the dam, but because it's directly adjacent to the right abutment section right here, we thought that as water sort of overflowed here, it would hit this and slow things down. And so that may actually decrease the likelihood that it breaches. and we want to look for the most likely location for a breach. So what we selected was something immediately next to this low spot, somewhere right about here. And so water starts to overflow there, and that's what we're actually assessing the likelihood of, is how likely is the dam to fail here if it starts to overtop. So we want to understand the materials of the embankment itself. And so we pulled together all of our geotechnical information based on borings, samples that we've gathered, and lab tests that we've done. And so we have a different, so this is a grain size analysis that helps us understand the erodibility of the material. And so here is so somebody asked, you know, what helps you estimate the likelihood of failure or the erodibility of something? And this is some of the information that we use to help us understand how erodible something is. And this KD is basically a numeric expression of the erodibility of a material. So the higher the number, the worse it is, or the more erodible it is. The lower the number, the more erosion resistant, or the better it is. So we see here a silty sand, or an SM, with sort of a lower fines content is the most erodible. Something, a fat clay or a CH, something that has, you know, a lot of plasticity associated with it, it's very low right here. So what we came up with is that basically our random pervious zones, or the green zones in our cross section, that's what's going to be resisting any overtopping. And so that's what we're trying to assess the likelihood of erosion is. And so we're going to say that's a silty sand with not sure what the fines content is. So this is our estimate of erodibility. So again, we look at our overtopping hydrographs. This thing, it was at our best estimate of PMF in the blue and our high estimate of the PMF in the orange. So this will overtop anywhere by, so the blue one overtops for 2.75 hours and a maximum depth of 0.5 meter. And this high estimate of PMF, which is the orange, overtops for 4.75 hours with a max depth of about 1.2 meters. So given that this is a sandy embankment and with a high high KD value or very little resistance to erosion, and it's going to overtop for 3 to 5 hours from 0.5 to 1.2 meters of overtopping depth, what's going to be most likely to drive this thing to failure? Is it, you know, so the team got together, they talked about it, and most people thought it was probably going to take a higher estimate of the PMF, or about something like 4 hours of overtopping by up to 1 meter of depth to actually breach this dam. And so that is the answer that we went with, was the high PMF. And so that was our risk assessment. And so then we would talk about the likelihood of that high PMF happening, which comes from our stage frequency curve. And then that becomes our likelihood of failure. So we based our annual probability of failure. So the team, the risk assessment team, selected the critical loading likely to have a system response probability of 1 or a likelihood of failure of 1. So what flood event would it take to actually breach this dam? And the team basically considered that the embankment it's highly erodible. It's a silty sand, but because the duration of overtopping was relatively brief, somewhere 3 to 5 hours, it was going to take a little bit more depth of overtopping to get this thing to actually fail. So that we came up with about 1 meter of overtopping. It helps, well, we don't need to get into that. Significant sources of uncertainty, lack of observed systematic H&H data. So we don't really know how likely it is for this overtopping event to happen. We don't have a lot of confidence in that. Same with the second one. Yeah, it's pretty much the first three deals with the likelihood of the flood event itself. The last one, we don't have any lab testing to actually tell us what the real erodibility of this material is. So we're estimating. Okay, that's basically kind of all I had. I think we're about out of time anyways. I can stick around if anybody has any more questions. I'll leave that up to you guys.
Perfeito, Adrian. Thank you very much. Do have some very few questions. Como os Estados Unidos se prepara para eventos
How does the
naturais?
United States prepare itself for natural flooding events?
Como terremotos,
Or
furacões,
other
proteger
events
suas
like
barragens.
hurricanes and earthquakes to protect its dams?
So a big way that we prepare for ourselves, prepare for these things, is we have imposed a risk-informed dam safety program and levee safety program. So that helps us prioritize which systems we need to expend our resources on to ensure that we reduce the risk of bad things happening. So we try to understand which dams are the worst, and we address those dams or levees first. And so we try to reduce the risk of life loss that way. We try to mitigate the consequences should some disaster occur. And we do that by implementing warning systems, trying to get the word out that, hey, floods can happen and that floods do happen. And so you need to be prepared. You need to be prepared to evacuate. And so that it helps to, in our messaging, should an event occur, we be specific with our messages that we put out so that people have the best information they can to go grab whatever they need to grab, get in their car and get out. So we try to reduce life loss that way. There's not really a whole lot we can do with the likelihood of loading. You know, storms will occur, but we try to understand that as best we can. As far should that storm occur or something like that, there are some situations where we would actually, like around the levees around New Orleans, Louisiana, we've actually put something called high performance turf reinforcement mat down, which actually greatly increases the resistance of erosion to these levees. And so we've improved the performance. We don't do that a lot, but we try to design things to handle we design dams to handle whatever hydrologic events come at them. For levees, we design to whatever level that we can to reduce the risk so that it's coordinate with the benefits they provide, which is a complicated math equation, but anyways, hopefully that's helpful. We try to attack the problem from all sides.
Okay. Thank you, Adrian. Pessoal, então nós vamos concluindo aqui o webinar. Tem uma pergunta final aqui, mas eu não sei se a gente vai ter tempo, até um pouco fora do escopo. Eu vou fazer aqui e passar para o Adrian com as suas palavras finais.
And I'm going to give the floor to Andrew for his final words.
E também para o Bill, que também levantou a mão e depois não sei se ele quer falar alguma coisa. E também Rogério e Bruno Rebouças estão conosco, da área de segurança de barragens da ANA. Se tem algum comentário final para a gente fechar, tá? A pergunta é como os Estados Unidos estimam o dano potencial associado. Se são usados o REC raios, modelos para cada barragem, se eu tenho alguma metodologia simplificada.
Like HEC-RAS for each dam, or do you adopt a more simplified methodology?
Adrian, obrigado. E já me
Andrew,
despeço por
thank you
aqui.
so much, and I'd
Obrigado
like
por
to
todos os participantes.
say
E
goodbye to
se
you and
puder
to thank all of the
responder e a gente ir
participants.
depois da sua
And then you
fala, eu
can
vou passar
answer
para os
this
demais para a
question
gente
and
já
give your final
fechar.
thoughts. And I'll also open the floor to anyone else from the organization who wants to speak. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Alon. Really appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys. So with regard to this final question, so I'm a dirt guy. I'm a geotechnical engineer. So I'm really kind of, outside my comfort zone. But yes, so again, we kind of, we estimate the size of the flood. Should a breach occur, we estimate the size of the breach. And based on those two things and a bunch of other things, we estimate the inundation area or the area downstream that floods. And that's HECRAS. We also use a few other break models, but we also use some modeling to help model how the population downstream gets out of the way. And that's where we sort of start to consider what kind of warning goes out, how likely somebody is to actually take action once they get that warning, and then how likely they are to get out of the danger zone should they start to take action. And so these are all things that we wrap up in an analysis we call life sim. That's a big analysis. And so these are all detailed analyses. That's the minimum that we do for all of our dams. Sometimes we take more simplistic analyses for levees just because there's so many more levees out there. And so we have to move a little bit quicker. It's a lower, we can't afford to spend as much time or money on every single estimate for the levees. We're getting better at it though. So, it's something we continually try to, and maybe this is some good final thoughts, is we continue to try to get better at all these things that we do, including assessing the likelihood of breach given overtopping or internal erosion or all these things. And so, but we can't do that for everything. So we have to scale our analyses to, the actual structure that we're looking at and the importance of it, the risk of it. So let me just say, I was honored to be asked to do this. I was really happy to get to talk to you guys. I really appreciate the interesting questions that you guys were asking. It's obviously you guys were very engaged, and yeah, best of luck to you. I'd be happy to answer any additional questions through email that you guys have, and hope everybody has a great weekend.
Perfeito, muito obrigado, Adriel. Bill, você quer comentar
Thank you
alguma
so
coisa?
much,
Você levantou
Andrew.
a mão.
Bill, do you want to comment on something? I think you raised your hand.
No, I kind of withdrew it, but I'd like to thank Andrew quite a bit. I learned a lot from this. So thanks, Andrew, for this.
Of course.
Certamente, agradeço aí todo o time da
Yes,
Usace
I'd like to thank all the U.S. Army
pela
Corps of
parceria e
Engineers
mais um
team for
webinar
your
que foi
partnership,
bastante.
and for
Nós
another
tivemos
webinar,
aqui
which was very fruitful. We
260,
had
270
260,
participantes.
270
Então,
participants. So
apesar dos probleminhas no
even though we
início,
had a few problems in the beginning
eu
with the
queria
link,
também lembrar que
well, I'd
a
just
gente
like to
deve emitir
remind you all
certificados de
that we'll be
participação
emitting certificates for
com base aqui na
participation
lista de
based
quem
on the
esteve
list
aqui
of
e
participants,
também
the attendance list,
falar
and
dos próximos webinars. A
we're
gente
also
está
going to be talking
programando um
about the
webinar
next webinars.
sobre
We're programming a
instrumentação
webinar
de
on
barragens
dam
e sobre
instrumentation
critérios
and on
hidrológicos
hydrological criteria
associados à segurança de
associated
barragens. E a gente
to
vai
dam
divulgar as
safety,
datas
and we're going to be
oportunamente.
publicizing the dates soon.
Rogério, Bruno, alguma palavra final?
Rogério, Bruno, do you have any final thoughts?
Boa tarde. Só queria agradecer.
Good afternoon. I'd just like to thank Andrew for his presentation, for all the questions he answered. Thank you so much. You cleared a lot of things up. I'd like to thank you for your partnership with the National Water and Basic Sanitation Agency. I'd just like to reinforce Bruno's words. The event was great. And I'd like to take advantage of this opportunity to tell you that next week on the 30th, we have a webinar to present the Dam Safety Report 2022. We're going to be handing it into the National Water Resource Council. I'd like to thank Andrew for this brilliant presentation. It was really a wealth of information. And in 10 days from now, these presentations will be saved on YouTube at Ana's YouTube in both English and Portuguese. And Alan has already mentioned that we'll have an automatic certificate being emitted if you participated in the platform. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Perfeito. Muito obrigado. Até a próxima. Uma boa tarde a todos.
Thank you so much. See you next time. Thank you, everyone.